The Encyclopedic Glossary of the Second Apocalypse. Written by R. Scott Bakker. Section C. Nerse Calmamunus. Man of the Tusk, the Palatine of the Conrayan province of Can and nominal leader of the Vulgar Holy War. Canons of Immemorule. Non-man regulative scriptures, outlining a wide variety of largely anachronistic codes of personal and social conduct. Cants of Calling. The family of incantations that enable communications over distance. Though the metaphysics of these cants is only loosely understood, all long-distance cants of calling seem to turn on the so-called here hypothesis. One can only call to slumbering souls, because they remain open to the outside, and only to those residing someplace where the caller has physically been. The idea is that the here of the caller can only reach a there or other location that has been a here sometime in the past. The degree of similarity between the anagogic and Gnostic cants of calling has led many to suspect that they hold the key to unraveling the gnosis. Cants of Compulsion. The family of incantations that control the movements of an individual's soul. Typically, these include the so-called Cants of Torment. An insidious aspect of these cants is that the subject often has no way of distinguishing sorcerously compelled thoughts from his own thoughts. This has spawned a whole literature on the very notion of will. If the compelled soul feels every bit as uncompelled as the free soul, then how can anyone truly know himself to be free? Cants of Scrying. The family of incantations that enable observation from long distances or obstructed vantages. Caphranius I, commonly called the Younger to distinguish him from his Ceneian namesake. The Nanser Sermonti Emperor, famed for his wily diplomacy and far-reaching reforms of the Nanser legal code. Coruscant. A major city and great caravan entrepot of the southwestern Three Seas. The administrative and commercial capital of Anathpania. Carythusal Desert. Vast arid region of dunes and gravel flats occupying southwestern Erwa. Large oases are primarily found along the eastern region of the desert, but there are skeletal river systems throughout. Carythusal. Ordealman, Grand Master of the Vocalati in the Great Ordeal of Anasarimber Kelhus. Known for his pride and mercurial temper, Carythusal is widely regarded as the soul most responsible for the disaster at Ursalor, where he met his end at the hands of Aparen Sacchares in 4132. Karu Oganian, the third god-king of Umarau, who, among many things, raised the original library of Sauglish. Carythusal, known as the City of Flies, the most populous city in the Three Seas, and the administrative and commercial capital of High Aenon. Casidas, the famed philosopher and historian of near antiquity, best known for his magisterial The Annals of Cannae, and famed for his youthful tenure as a galley slave. Castes. Inherited social statuses. Though weaker in the so-called Middle North, the Enrithi caste system is one of the central institutions of Three Seas society. In a technical sense, there are almost as many castes as there are occupations, but in practice, they fall into roughly 4 different groups. The Suthenti, or laboring class, the Mumarai, or transactional castes, the Nahat, or priestly castes, or the Kingenta, or warrior castes. Elaborate protocols supposedly govern all interactions within and between castes to ensure the observances of various privileges and obligations, as well as to minimize ritual pollution. But in practical terms, they are rarely adhered to. Anasarimber Kelmomus II. The implacable foe of Golgotharath in the early days of the Apocalypse, and last of the Kunioric High Kings. Kelmomian Prophecy. The dying words of Anasarimber Kelmomus II to Seswatha on the fields of Elionot in 2146, to the effect that Anasarimber would return at the end of the world. Given that the prevention of the so-called Second Apocalypse is the Mandate's entire reason for existence, it is perhaps no surprise that most Mandate scholars think the Kelmomian prophecy authentic. Few in the Three Seas credit their claims, however. Cannae, a city of the Carythusal plain that arose from the age of warring cities to conquer the entire Three Seas. Cannae was destroyed by the Skilvendi under Horiotha in 3351. The Ceneian Empire, the greatest Ketii empire in history, embracing the entirety of the Three Seas at its greatest extent, from the Atcondris Mountains in the southwest to Lake Husi in the north, to the Carythusal Mountains in the southeast. The primary agent in the creation and maintenance of this empire was the Ceneian Imperial Army, which was perhaps the best trained and organized in history. No more than a minor river trading town in the days of Cyrenius, Cannae emerged from the age of warring cities as the preeminent city of the Carythusal plain. The conquest of Gaelath in 2349 sealed the city's regional dominance, and in the ensuing decades, the Cannaeans under Zerkhalis II would secure the remnants of what had once been Cyrenius. Zerkhalis' successors continued his aggressive expansionist policies, first pacifying the Norserai tribes of Sepulur, then waging 3 consecutive wars against Shigek, which fell in 2397. Then, in 2414, after conquering Anathpania, Zerosh, and Imotu, General Naxentis staged a successful coup and declared himself Emperor of Cannae. Though he would be assassinated the following year, all his successors would avail themselves of the imperial institutions he created. Trimus I became emperor in 2478, beginning what most scholars consider the Cannaean Golden Age. In 2483, he conquered Nilnemesh, and then Singulat the following year. In 2485, he defeated a great Zeumi host at Amara, and would have invaded the Sayuthi nation had not mutinies among his homesick troops prevented him. He spent the next decade consolidating his gains, and striving against the internecine religious violence between the followers of the traditional Kuniat sects and the growing number of Inrithi. It was in the course of negotiating settlements that he became friends with the then Shraya of the Thousand Temples, Echianus III, and in 2505 he himself converted to Inrithism, declaring it the official state religion of the Ceneian Empire. He spent the next 10 years putting down religious rebellions, while at the same time invading and occupying both Saranj in 2508 and Naran in 2511. He spent 10 years campaigning across the eastern Three Seas against the successor nations of the old Sharadi Empire, first conquering Aenon in 2518, then Kingemis in 2519, and finally Anad in 2525. Ensuing aspect emperors would marginally add to the extent of the empire, but its boundaries remained fairly stable for nearly 800 years, during which time the language and institutions of Imperial Cannae and the Thousand Temples would be stitched into the very fabric of Three Seas society. Aside from the periodic wars with Zeum, and the interminable wars against the Skilvendi and Norserai tribes across the empire's northern frontier, this would be an age of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and commerce. Only the periodic civil wars, usually fought over succession, posed any real threat to the empire, and in writings from the time, the assumption is that the empire was eternal. Though Cannae itself was destroyed by the Skilvendi under Horiotha in 3351, historians traditionally date the collapse of the Cannaean Empire in 3372, when General Morelta surrendered to Sarothesar I in Aenon. Kengemis, the province that once marked the northern limit of the eastern Cannaean Empire. After the collapse of the Eastern Empire in 3372, it enjoyed independence until overrun by Tidoni tribes in 3742. Sepulur, a region of temperate semi-forested plains extending east of the Hinatas from the Nansir frontier to the southwestern marches of Galioth. Since the fall of Cyrenius, Sepulur has been inhabited by Norserai pastoralists known as the Sepuluri, who have long been tributaries of the Nansurium. The Sarish Sea, the largest of Erwa's inland seas. Se Tidone, a Norserai nation of the Three Seas, located north of Conraia on the eastern shoreline of the Mjolnir, founded in 3742 in the wake of Khegemis's collapse. The first mention of the Tidoni is found in Caicidus' Annals of Cannae, where he mentions their raids across the River Swa. Descendants of white Norserai refugees from the apocalypse, the Tidoni are thought to have occupied the southern regions of the Daemori wilderness for centuries, prevented by their native fractiousness from causing much difficulty for their southern Ketii neighbors. At some point in the 38th century, however, they united, and with little difficulty overwhelmed the men of Khegemis in the Battle of Marswa in 3722. It wasn't until King Hall Namyelk finally succeeded in unifying the various tribes under his absolute authority in 3741 that Se Tidone proper came into existence. Perhaps the most peculiar and distinctive predilection of the Tidoni is found in their racial beliefs. Tidun literally means struck iron in their tongue, reflecting their belief that their people have been purified by the crucible of their long wandering through the Daemori wildernesses. They hold that this gives them privileged blood, rendering them morally, intellectually, and physically superior to other races. This has made the Tidoni cruel overlords of the Kengemi, who have often rebelled against them. Chalahal, most famed of the 100 heavens named in the Chronicle of the Tusk. In the Book of Songs, it is, where the soil sings and men breathe most deep, where heartbreak melts into slow, smiling joy, and pain dwells as a wise old friend in memory. It is sometimes named as the province of Unkis, and sometimes Yatwer. Chanv, an addictive narcotic popular among the Ainani aristocracy, although many eschew it because of its uncertain origins. Chanv reputedly sharpens the intellect, extends one's lifespan, and drains the body of all its pigments. Chorae, the famed Shrial commentator and author of the 10 Holies. Akamian's replacement as Proyas' tutor in esoterics in 1493. Chef Ramuni, man of the Tusk, king regent of High Aenon, nominal leader of the Ainani during much of the First Holy War, claimed by disease at Karaskand. Chia Nadaini, a governant of Kian and one-time tributary of the Ceneian Empire. Located to the west of Umarna and east of Nilnemesh, Chia Nadaini is the traditional homeland of the Kianin, and after Umarna, the wealthiest and most populous government in Kian. Chorae, artifacts of the ancient north, also known as trinkets to the schools, and the tears of God to the Enrithi. In appearance, Chorae are small iron spheres, 1 inch in diameter, that are banded by runes written in Gil Kunya, the holy tongue of the non-men Kuya. Chorae are extraordinary, in that they render their bearer immune to all sorcerous cants and instantly kill any sorcerer who comes in contact with them. Although the principles behind their creation, they belong to a lost branch of sorcery called the Aporos, are no longer understood, thousands are believed to circulate in the Three Seas alone. The Chorae play a pivotal role in the political balance of power in the Three Seas, insofar as they allow the non-scholastic great factions to check the power of the schools. The Chorae hail. Name given to the infamous barrage that killed the 61, more than a third of the Sohonk, attempting to overthrow Ubil Maw, the extrinsic gate of Golgotharath, during the Second Great Investiture in 2142. Though following the command of an Osirimber Kelmomus, the incident is widely cited as Seswatha's greatest blunder during the apocalypse. The Chronicle of the Tusk, the most ancient extant human text in Erwa, and the scriptural foundation for all Manish faiths save Fanamri. As the oldest literate work, its provenance is almost entirely unknown. Even its language, Thoti Aenorian, has become an ancient relic, rendering the Tusk the subject of endless interpretive dispute. Many Inrithi commentators have pointed out that it must have been a collective work, cobbled together from many, likely oral, sources over a period of many years. According to a handful of sources, the non-men believe it to be corrupted by the Inchoroi, an arguably successful means to effect their extinction. Like most scriptures, its popular interpretation is highly selective and idealized. It consists of the following 6 books. The Book of Canticles, the old Tusk laws regarding every aspect of personal and public life, which were superseded in the Inrithi tradition by the revised strictures of the Tractate, and then amended once again by the Zaudunyani. It famously opens, "And lo, the chieftains of men gathered in the tent of meeting that hath been struck below the mountain where the bull bellows, and thus spake in Geshriel, saying, These are the words of the hunter, who comes as pounding upon the horizon, declaring the pact binding God to God according to man, and how souls shall reap as they had sown. And these were the laws of purity, and offering, and diet, and conduct between all the walks that move us through life. And these were the law of what may, or may not, be lawfully thought." Book of the Gods, the primary basis of individual cultic scriptures, enumerating the various gods and explaining the rites of purification and propitiation basic to each. The Book of Hinerates, the story of Hinerates, an upright man plagued with apparently undeserved adversity. "The life of gods is the life after the hard passing of life," the nameless psalmist begins. "The gods know no weal." The following fable explains how the suffering of Hinerates in this life was actually commensurate to his reward in the next, thereby encoding a deep instability into all faiths of the Tusk. The assumption that the successful, the powerful, were almost always certainly damned. Temporal fortune, we are assured, is not but the shadow of eternal damnation. In his Annals, Casidas contends that Hinerates was what drove the powerful to incessant war, to leap to Gilgaol, lest falling deeper still. Later in the Annals, he writes that contention is the greatest curse of our religion. If the powerful are not waging war to save their souls, their people are waging war against them for being damned. A passage that has been, not surprisingly, redacted in a great many copies. The Book of Songs, a collection of verse prayers and parables extolling the virtues of piety, manliness, courage, and tribal loyalty. The Book of Tribes, the extended narrative of the first prophets and chieftain kings of the 5 tribes of men before the invasion of Erwa. And finally, the Book of Warrants, the account of the observances governing the interactions between castes. Kilaugus, one of the 9 mansions of Erwa, located in the Oswai Mountains. Kinkulik, the undeciphered tongue of the Inchoroi, which the non-men called Kinkulhisa, or the gasp of many reeds. According to the Isu Furious, communication between the Kunaroi and the Inchoroi was impossible until the latter quote-unquote birthed mouths and began speaking Kunaroi tongues. Shiogli, the legendary Sheolin hero of the non-man, perhaps the most famous of the tall, slain at Pir Min Giniol. Siranj, a Ketai nation of the 3 Seas, located on the northwestern coast of Kutnarmu, just south of Nilnemesh. The Circumfix, symbol of an Asurimber Kelhus, the warrior prophet. The innumerable versions of the sacred image that proliferated across the 3 Seas generally fall into 3 forms. Abstract, typically consisting of a circle about an X. Realistic, generally following the representational customs pertaining to idols in various nations, such as the phallic circumfixes outlawed by the Thousand Temples in 4119. For some reason, all forms consistently omit Surway. The Circumfixion, the famed attempt to publicly execute an Asurimber Kelhus during the legendary 4112 siege of Karskand. an ancient practice of the Cuniat, the Enrithi generally reserved circumfixion for the most severe crimes of heresy, such as false prophecy. The practice involved binding the condemned, first to the corpse of a loved one, typically a daughter or wife, and then upside down upon an iron ring, which would then be displayed where the populace could watch their agonizing death, usually by asphyxiation, over the course of several hours. The circumfixion of an Osra Berkelhus was remarkable in a number of respects. With the First Holy War trapped and starving within Coruscant, the so-called Great and Lesser Names hoped his execution would reunite and rekindle the resolve of the ailing host. Rather than dying quickly, however, Kelhus lived another 2 days, during which time the strife between the Orthodox and the so-called Zaudunyani intensified. Accounts vary, but somehow the return of Drusus Acamian brought the conversion of Nursei Proias, one of the most influential of the great names. This, in turn, inspired a consult skin spy, masquerading as Cucius Sarcellus of the Shrial Knights, to murder Kelhus, an attempt foiled by the Skilvendi Neir Ursciotha. Once Sarcellus was revealed, the men of the Tusk cut down an Osra Berkelhus, who, before the assembled masses, miraculously pulled his heart from his chest as a final proof of his divinity. Circumfix Throne, primary throne of the Aspect Emperor, located in the Imperial Audience Hall upon the Endiamine Heights. The popular lore holds that the iron ring built into the back of the throne is the actual circumfix, but such is not the case. Kisharim, the notorious priest-sorcerers of the Phanim, based in Shima. According to Phanim religious tradition, the prophet Phane became the first of the Kisharim after he went blind in the desert. Given Phane's claim that the true power of the solitary god cannot be exercised so long as one sees the profane world, Kisharim initiates voluntarily blind themselves, enabling them to dispense the divine water of the Sukkah. Little is known about the metaphysics of the Sukkah, beyond the fact that it cannot be perceived by the few, and that it is in many ways almost as formidable as the anagogic practice of the schools. Prior to the First Holy War, the Scarlet Spires categorized individual Kisharim according to their power. Tertiaries, or those with only the most rudimentary strength. Secondaries, or those with strength comparable to sorcerers' initiates. And primaries, those with the strength exceeding that of the initiates, but still, according to the Scarlet Magi, short of strength possessed by true anagogic sorcerers of rank. Citadel of the Dog. The great redoubt of Coruscant, as named by the men of the Tusk. Raised by Zaetantius in 3684, it was originally called Insarum until it fell to the Phanim in 3839, who called it Ilhuda, the Bulwark. Coffers, the legendary treasury of the ancient library of Soglish. House Coithus, the ruling dynasty of Gelion. The College of Luthimai. The College of the Thousand Temples responsible for spying and intelligence, unique in that it answers directly to the Shriya, notorious for recruiting those of the few who do not practice sorcery. Not surprisingly, no collegians are more despised or feared by schoolmen. The College of Seriot, a college of the Thousand Temples dedicated to the preservation of knowledge, destroyed in the fall of Shigek in 3933. The Commerce of Souls. Agensis' classic treatise on politics. For Agensis, famously, market vendors are the best exemplars of politics, which he famously called the obscure art of deriving 2 favors for 1. More alarmingly, he extols slavery as the truest expression of political governance, a provocation that many have used to dismiss him over the centuries. These critics entirely overlook the satirical nature of the text, which argues, in sooth, that exploitation and coercion belong to the very logic of the political. As he famously puts it, the coin stands as close to the lash as to the bread, revealing the commerce of souls as a network of substitutions, all mediated by currency, all bound into a single system. This is why there is always bounty, be it bread or lash. Where harvests fail, wars succeed. The Compendium, heretical treatise written by Drusus Acamian, one-time holy tutor of Ceneian Empire, following his exile from the Three Seas in 4112. Much has been made of the fact that Ceneian Empire exempted Drusus Acamian from excision, removal from all records, especially following the appearance of the compendium in 4119. The book itself was criminalized, but since Drusus Acamian yet retained the status of holy tutor in the scriptural canon, it amounted to a perpetual scandal, and so was doomed to be shared and copied across the Three Seas, and beyond. Some argue that the Blessed Empress, a former lover of the apostate schoolman, was responsible, but such accounts merely explain Drusus Acamian's exemption from execution, not his exemption from excision. This has led others to suspect that Ceneian Empire I saw some advantage in the covert dissemination of the compendium. The apparent absurdity of the charges leveled by the former mandate schoolman, coupled with the repudiation of the standard demonizations of the aspect emperor, the argument contends, likely had the effect of confusing the Phanom and orthodoxy in Rithi opposition. The Khand, ancient High Norserai pastoralists inhabiting the Astuli Plains. The Khand first entered recorded history circa 350 as the antagonist in a series of wars, the first Khand Wars, fought by all the greater cities of the Almaris against their barbaric cousins to the east. The destruction of Sarglish would galvanize the remaining cities under the leadership of Umarau, as opposed to Trice, thus laying the groundwork for the eventual rise of the Umeri Empire. The Second Khand Wars would see the Umeri humiliated, forced to pay tribute for an entire generation. Finally, in 917, under the leadership of Aluniau the Conqueror, the Khans sacked Umarau and became masters of the Rimmer Almaris, an age often referred to as Pseudo Umeri, given the degree to which the Khand were assimilated. The conditioning. Specifically, the arduous physical, emotional, and intellectual training undergone by Dunyan monks, though the term has more general and far-reaching connotations as well. The Dunyan believe that everything is conditioned in some way, but they draw a principal distinction between the arbitrary conditioning of the world and the rational conditioning of men. Conditioning in the light of the Logos, they believe, allows more such conditioning, which in turn leverages more such conditioning, and so on. This virtuous cycle, they believe, finds its apotheosis in the absolute. The Dunyan believe that, using reason, they can condition themselves to the point of becoming unconditioned, a perfect, self-moving soul. The confluence. In neuropuncture, the structures of the brain most closely bound to the soul. The congregate. In the Nansurium, the body of government expressing the legislative will of the great families of the Nansur. In its imperial incarnation, the body of government tasked with informing and advising the Holy Aspect Emperor. Icure Confus, man of the Tusk, and nephew of Emperor Icure Zarias III, and apparent heir to the imperial mantle. Conraya, a preeminent Ketai nation of the eastern Three Seas, located south of Seithaidon and north of Haenon, founded in 3374, after the collapse of the eastern Ceneian Empire, around Eognissus, the ancient capital of Shur. Of the four successor nations to the Sharadi Empire, Kengemis, Conraya, Aenon, and Sansor, none has worked so hard to reclaim and preserve its ancient traditions. Nowhere are the caste divisions more rigidly observed, and nowhere are the codes governing caste noble behavior more strict. Though many, particularly the Aenoni, scoff at what they consider the affection of antique ways, there can be little doubt that the resulting social discipline has served the Conrayans well. Since gaining independence, Conraya has successfully weathered innumerable incursions, invasions, blockades, and embargoes. Almost all of them due to the machinations of Haenon. The Consult. Name given to the unholy triumvirate of men, non-men, and Inkoroi, intent upon exterminating all souls in a bid to save their own souls from eternal damnation. The sheer age of the Cabal, let alone its devotion to sorcery, render its origins murky. Though the Gnostic schools of Sohonk and Mengeka are referenced as far antique contemporaries, the Mangekka is the older of the two schools, as well as the one possessing the deepest non-man affiliations which would prove instrumental to the school's transformation into the consult. Mandate scholars agree that Kettingira, Macaritrig, revealed the location of the Ark to the Mangekka at some point in the 8th century, seeking mannish assistance in his mad attempt to gain entry into the Inku Haloinus. Nilgigas had sealed the high, or upright horn, the age previous, first by heaping titanic amounts of debris upon the impregnable Saugamont, the golden alloy from which the Ark is comprised, from the inside, and then by commanding Emilitis to raise the barricades across the only remaining portal high upon the heights. For centuries, the cunning of these impediments had denied every attempt to surmount them, until the year 1111, when Sheon-Narnra finally managed to bring down the barricades. The Mangekka raised Nogarol upon Viri soon after, pretending to plumb the destroyed non-man mansion, while in fact plumbing the upright horn, the intact heart of the Inku Haloinus. At some point in their exploration, they discovered and awakened the last Inkoroi, Orax and Orang, at which point Kettingira ceased being Siku, and Sheon-Narnra ceased being Grand Master of the Mangekka, and the Unholy Consult of the Halaroi, Kunaroi, and Inkoroi was born, a pact between the most brilliant and fearsome souls of all three races, an oath to destroy the world. Though most Mandate scholars suspect Consult involvement in the death of the celebrated Sohonk Grand Master Tuturga sometime around 1119, 150 years would pass before the nations of men began to suffer their efforts. The calamity of the First Great Shrank War, for instance, was almost certainly due to their efforts to breed and control Shrank. But it was not until the apocalypse that the far antique world would learn the true danger they represented. Korunk, infamous northern tower of Igorior, a great bastion of Golgataroth, cursed as the Eater of Suns in the Book of Generals. Cubit, catch-all phrase for the myriad units of measure used throughout Erwa, generally indicating a length from the tip of the finger to the elbow, but also notoriously problematic, as with the near-antique translation of non-man utils, literally translated 10, into cubits. Even the non-man cubit proper, or priror, is more than twice the length of a mannish cubit, consisting, as it does, of the height of the waist from the floor. Kuchara Kimwa, from Irimsu, meaning white shining spear, issue of Ketmoil and Linkiru, the scandalous son and daughter of Kuhoriel, king of Sheol, who would raise the boy as his heir, following the execution of his own children. Even as a young boy, his beauty and charisma were legendary. Perfection breathes, a nameless scribe writes of him in the Isufirius, and we must assure it never bleeds. Ferocious in war, his renown only grew, reaching even those mansions possessing little or no congress with Sheol. The scandalous circumstance of his birth had merely anointed his legend, resonating as it did with the scriptural coupling of Sonos and Olysses. The death of Kuhoriel signaled the death of his popularity, and not simply because of the general hatred of Sheol. As king of House Primordial, Kujara Kimwa quickly revealed an arrogance and ambition more characteristic of men than non-men. The tenor of the Isufirius changes in the span of 3 cantos. In him, one entry reads, verily, purity hath become perversion. Across those mansion reaches bounding that of Sheol, the blood of Yishroi began to flow. The king of Sheol became the tyrant. His name dominates the lays and records surviving from that period. Such was his celebrity. Arkfall and the catastrophes that ensued would merely serve to make him tragic, if not reviled. He possessed, as one contemporary muses, all Ishroi prized, all they called glory, only in proportions that cracked hearts and mountains. Kujara Kimwa was doomed to be the darling of myth and legend, by his nature as much by his circumstances. though the wont of mannish poets is to see him as the cipher for the non-man more generally. It serves to remember that he is extraordinary precisely because he is unlike any other non-men, more recognizably human, living in the age of his race's destruction. Cults. The collective name for all the various sects devoted to the individual gods of the so-called Cuniat. In the 3 Seas, the cults have been administratively and spiritually subordinate to the 1,000 temples since Triamus I, the first aspect emperor of Cannae, declared Inrithism the official state religion of the Ceneian Empire in 2505. The Kuno and Koroi Wars. The protracted series of wars between the non-men and the Inkoroi, following the ancient arrival of the latter. According to the Isu Furius, the Inku Haloinus, the Ark of the Skies, plunged to earth to the west of the Sea of Neliost, in land ruled by Ninchanchen, the non-man king of Viri. The letter sent by Sorry, guys. I hope you won't think that I'm lazy. It's just that this entry is about 2,000 words long, and I already did a 20-minute video on the Kuno and Koroi Wars. You can watch it here. Kunwershao, first god-king of Tri-Se, famed for the conquering of all the cities of the Almaris, as well as forging the first treaty between men and non-men.